Hi, everyone. Welcome to the What's Next podcast series. This is part of the innovation series. We have a special guest today, Tom Sebastian, with us today to discuss something really interesting in the cross border trade and innovation space. I've always been very fascinated of this space. And I think India being at the central uh, in, in the entire trade of the world, where we connect East and West, I think this space I'm sure would grow in really big ways in the future. A quick overview about Tom. Tom is presently program director at Norden. It's an Indo-Danish SME platform. He's based out of Bangalore and he's had over a decade of experience working as an entrepreneur and a strategy consultant. He's worked at Accenture and the BCG Group as well. And his last role was at the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs prior to joining where he's right now at Norden. So he has a really wide and deep exposure across the Denmark ecosystem. And we would obviously figure out more from him and get insights about the ecosystem. So, Tom, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Vishal.
So, Tom, I think just getting into it, if you could give a quick overview about the cross-border trade and innovation space, obviously keeping Denmark or maybe Nordics as the reference point. How has it evolved in the past, maybe 10, 15 years, and what are we seeing presently?
So if you go back for probably about 10, 15 years, traditional cross-border exchanges have been primarily driven by exports and imports, right? The Nordic countries have exports of either meats, dairy, and general food products, right? That's where they started off with. In fact, back in the day, if you think about it, the use case that we often remember is how Indira Gandhi had imported bulls into India, or to kind of help bring out a more higher milk producing breed in India for milk, for cows, thereby fostering the white revolution. So if you were to ask my father or ask people, of an older generation, what was Denmark known for, they would often tell you Denmark or Denmark cows, or Danish cows, or Danish milk, or Danish cheese. So dairy has always been an interest point, right? So over decades, this sort of an exchange of goods has primarily been the way of cross-border trade. Now, over the past 10 years, there's been a marked shift, and I'll take a use case, or a specific case of Denmark, because I can speak about that, of where Denmark has changed not just its export of goods, what I spoke about earlier, but has now moved further into export of knowledge and technology, right? So that's the key shift. If you ask me, there's more knowledge and deep technology that is being exported to the rest of the world. Case in point on this is, if you just think about wind technology, travel anywhere across India, go towards the southern belts of India in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, you will start seeing a lot of wind farms all over the countryside. And if you look at the wind farms, you will see very prominent companies like Vestas being featured there. Vestas is a Danish company that has a massive manufacturing plant in Chennai. So wind has come in very strongly, and that import of knowledge and technology is what spurred the green revolution, also the energy saving revolution out. So that's been the larger angle or shift, if you were to ask me, of what changed in the cross-border trade space. It's moved from goods and to include technology, and that share of technology versus goods, I see technology increasing. It's more technology import and export that's happening, import and export that's happening. So it's more to the softer side of things.
Got it. No, that's an interesting transition, I think, from goods and maybe manufacturing to a bit a few years back, maybe a decade or two back, to technology. I think talent over there in Europe, the Nordics, as well as India in terms of technology, I think has exponentially increased. I think hence we are seeing a lot of technology and knowledge transfer between the countries. So that's an interesting take. So maybe taking it to the next step, just wanted to see how obviously startups is now a normal word, and people have made careers out of it, and there's so much happening in the startup ecosystem in India specifically. But having said that, there's a lot of action happening in Europe as well. Obviously, maybe more sector focused, that where startups would like to explore either countries. Indian startups looking at Denmark, Danish startups looking at India. So Tom, just wanted to get your thoughts on what are the main, it could be startups, SMEs, main sectors that Denmark is famous for, and has there been startups and SMEs coming to India, setting up business here and expanding in the Indian ecosystem? So if you could just give a quick overview on that, would be interesting.
Sure, sure. So I'll take a step back, right? So traditionally, it's always been the larger companies that have made their foray from Denmark into India or India into Denmark, right? So it's been the companies in the wind, water, energy sector, dairy sector that have been primarily moving towards India. You've got very large companies, Danish companies in India. Of course, the most famous that we all know is Carlsberg and Lego. Two of my favorite things, beer and play toys. But you also have companies like Novozymes, Novo Nordisk, which are enzyme companies and companies dealing with insulin production for dealing with diabetes. And these large companies did take over Indian businesses. So Biocon sold part of their enzyme business to facilitate the initiation of Novozymes and Novo Nordisk, right? So you've seen these large company movements happening the same way large companies from India have now been looking at startups and SMEs in the Nordics. You've got Infosys, Wipro. Wipro recently made an acquisition of Designit, a leading design company within Denmark, and now they're part of their portfolio of services that they offer. Infosys has made investments into startups and areas within multiple spaces across the Nordics. So you've got many countries and Denmark for access to technology, right? Now, coming to the startup movement and SME movement, before I dwell into that, I think it's important for me to share what we do at Nordin and base my experiences, the answers on my experiences here, right? So at Nordin, we are a collaboration of 4 organizations in the Nordics, so in Denmark. First one is Asia House. Asia House is the organization that I represent. It's based out of Copenhagen. Asia House is a policy and engagement platform for Asian countries with Denmark and vice versa. Is my former employer, the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, through a specific unit called Innovation Center Denmark, which is located in Bangalore as well as one of their hubs. The third organization is called the Confederation of Danish Industries, very similar to CII and FICCI that we have in India. And so they have their satellite office in Mumbai, and fourthly is an organization called Green Innovation Group, which is based out of Copenhagen and Lisbon. They are in the corporate startup engagement space, right? So the intent behind Nordin is to identify high-value SMEs and startups from the Danish ecosystem and help them succeed in the Indian market. Now, what we mean by success, it could be anything from gaining access into the market, identifying potential partnerships and clientele, sourcing the right kind of talent to set up their operations out here, potentially co-developing their product to make it suitable for the Indian market, right? And in this mix of what we do at Nordin, we've worked with, since 2019, we've worked with over 35 companies so far, 35 Danish companies. And our split has been 70% SMEs and 30% startups. And the reason we've kind of chosen to go lower on the startup side is because in India, when we talk startup, even an average size startup is about 50 to 100 people. I mean, that's just a factor of our population, right? A startup in Denmark, on the other hand, would be probably 5 to 10 people. So
Right.
if you are looking at a startup in Denmark, it would be a micro company in India. And it is not easy for them to work in a complex market like India, but of course, with the right support, they can make it. On the other hand, Indian startups are almost the size of smaller medium-sized companies, SMEs out there, right? So it's easier for the Indian companies to plug in. So there has been movement on either end, but the sectors that have been a focus for us in Denmark has always been food tech, So anything to do around food production, sustainable food production, food testing, anything to do with the food sector. Second is clean tech that involves water, waste, energy, solar, and everything else, right? So all of those sectors come into clean tech. Then you've got that's built up a credential over the years, which is in the ICT sector, which is the communication and technology sector, right? Digitalization, data-driven innovation. There is a massive sector that's booming and has a deep expertise in Denmark. The other sector that has deep expertise in Denmark is the life sciences space. That's traditionally been Danish heritage, right? So you have life sciences companies, biotech companies that have come into foray. The other sector apart from this would be AI and robotics. Now, I say AI and robotics together, even though independently they are large, large playing fields altogether. But there has been a lot of Danish and Nordic technology development in this space. In fact, within the robotics space, and I'll talk about clusters as we in the future segments. In Denmark, you have a city called Odense, and Odense has so 120 companies within a place that has 2 lakh people, which is, I would say, 1/6 the size of Bangalore in population, right?
Yep.
So we are seeing clustering that's happening, and these are the clusters that also have a high importance in a country like India, because India sees the demand in these areas, and that's traditionally been the areas that have flourished a lot. Of course, I can't forget fintech. Copenhagen, just like London, massive fintech hub in fintech innovation, and they have been having a lot of unicorns within this space that have come out in the past 5 years.
Awesome, Tom. I think that's a crazy. I didn't know that Denmark had companies across these sectors. I think fintech was something new for me. I always thought UK was the hub in Europe, but good to hear that there are unicorns in the fintech space. So since you had mentioned like from food tech to ICT, life sciences, AI robotics to fintech, obviously for this you would need good talent either ways. I mean, you would need talent in Europe, or it could be in Nordics where people maybe move to Denmark, or maybe expatriates coming from other nations, maybe coming for their bachelor's, master's, and then maybe graduating into a good company out there in Denmark.
Right.
So Tom, would be interesting to get your insights on this, how Denmark has been able to manage their talent, maybe from touching upon the education bit and then kind of moving on to opportunities for expatriates, locals, and Europeans across close to Denmark.
So one of the good things about the EU countries, and then specifically about Denmark also, apart from the very high taxation rate, is that the taxes that people pay is given back to them in the form of free education, right? Free Medicare, retirement benefits, infrastructure development. So there's a lot of benefits that come from that. And like I said, one of the primary benefits is the access to free education. And now that's revolutionized in the innovation index or the innovation capability within the Danish population. And it's also one of the reasons why Denmark, apart from Sweden and Finland, are ranked amongst the happiest countries in the world. It's because people are doing jobs that they have trained for, and they have worked in areas and developed deep expertise. So they find meaning in what they do, right? So this means that people in Denmark or the EU citizens can access free education in Denmark, right up to your PhD level. And people want to pursue higher education. There's a higher need that they see to develop expertise in really specific areas, right? Now, that being said, you have to also factor in and keep in consideration, Vishal, that the population of Denmark is 5 million people. And that's half the population of Bangalore, relatively half the population of Bangalore. Right? So if you are looking at the kind of innovation capacity they have and the appetite for developing technology, there's obviously going to be a need to augment with technology resources, right? So you will potentially, if you're a development project and you're working on, deep AI tech, you will probably find AI experts in Denmark. But will you find a lot of AI developers? Will you find AI data scientists out there? Not as many as you need as a company. And that's
True.
when the interest comes in for expatriates to look at that space. Right?
Got it.
There's a lot of demand in Denmark for development jobs. I remember many years ago, I was talking to a startup based out of Copenhagen. And even today, this culture is practiced. Every startup in Denmark takes pride in the number of nationalities they have on their team. So
Wow.
as a startup culture, they want to have people from different nationalities on their teams. And this is sort of this informal competition that goes on within the Copenhagen startup areas, at least, because Copenhagen is the hub for startups predominantly. Within the startup founders, you will see this sort of a little competition going on, saying, I have people from 22 nationalities, and the other one says, I have people from 25, right? So there's always an interest to bring in international mindsets into the team. And that's just not because they want different perspectives, but it's also because of availability of talent from the expatriate communities as well, right? So that's what you have to factor in. There's always opportunity when looking at working with Danish companies for expatriates. And for Indians specifically, one of the interesting routes that can be taken is, of course, applying for higher education out in the Nordics, in Denmark, doing probably a master's. It's not too expensive to do a master's out in Denmark as well. But the quality of education that you receive is much, much higher, and a higher value for money. Once you do your master's, you can then go out and find a job and settle out in the country. The other way to do it is for startups themselves. If you are an innovative startup, there is mechanisms available in Denmark to attract new startups to come and set up operations out there. So you have access given by the government, by the civil society, to attract international startups into the country and help them work. And in that space of startups, I've been an entrepreneur myself. I realize how difficult it is to run a startup in an international location, right?
True.
You have to deal with regulations. You have to understand the laws and the nitty-gritties. But if you had mechanisms to help you ease that path, it becomes a lot more easier setting up and running the business out there, right?
True.
And that's what Denmark offers. Denmark offers that ease and transparency to set up a company. We can literally set up a company within a day in Denmark.
Awesome.
The paperwork is minimized, everything is digital, and you have a very clear roadmap listed out for you. So for the expatriate community, there are multiple ways to integrate into civil society there, out in Denmark as well. And the education, the access to free education, international education, has led to probably over 90% of the country being very fluent in English. Of course, they love to speak Danish, but communities are open to English speakers, and the language that they accept is English as well. So integration into society for startups, for businesses that are looking, or expatriates looking into Denmark, is so much more easier.
And that's awesome. I think, Tom, the encouraging part is, as you said, I think the society fundamentally is welcoming. And I think I want to touch upon the language. And I think since most of the population speak English, I don't think they consider English as a foreign language. So I think that makes it easier for the, especially Indian community, to look at Denmark as a place to obviously do their masters, at the same time look for a job as well, and kind of build a life around there. So I think that's quite encouraging.
But what is interesting as a demographic you should understand also is that the Indian diaspora in Denmark is the fastest growing community.
Oh, wow.
That's also there. So that's interesting. That's not surprising, but it's also very interesting how there's a lot of demand for Indian talent that has also come in, right? There's also a lot more Indians that are pursuing very specialized training in education out there as well. So that's quite interesting to know.
Got it. And Tom, maybe taking it a step ahead, I think the society also in Denmark is more research oriented. So I think jobs, most of the jobs which require research focused minds, I think most of them come from research happening in the universities. So just wanted to get an understanding of the university and corporate connect, because since most of these spaces, from life sciences to clean tech to AI and robotics, I'm sure there's a lot of research and hardware driven research happening. So just a university corporate connect, how efficient is that? Yeah.
Of course. It's actually a very interesting question you raise here, because I think that's one of the unique factors that I've found of why Denmark is innovative, and it also tends to have a higher happiness quotient within their own societies, right? Because there's a high degree of cooperation and transparency. Now, what I mean by that is that universities are seen as a hub for developing knowledge. Companies are an offshoot of that knowledge being translated into action and to create impact. So there's always a very close bond between companies and universities, be it in sourcing technology, so translating their research work into value propositions, or potentially even just developing new technologies in universities. But that's not the unique thing I was talking about. The unique thing that I was talking about is this concept called the triple helix structure, right? The triple helix that Denmark practices is a combination or a collaboration of agencies across civil society. So industrial companies, so your technology companies or businesses in general, work with universities and they work with governments. So forming a triangle, a triple helix structure, right? And what that means is that when companies have to increase their innovation capability, they look at universities, which help them in that process for developing technology.
Interesting.
Universities advise the governments in terms of policy related towards innovation. Government consults with companies and does an on-ground evaluation of what's really needed to support them to grow further. So this triple helix structure has led to the formation of clusters, and that's what's been the best example of the implementation of triple helix structures. Denmark today has about 14 different clusters, across the country, and these 14 clusters, they range across technology spaces, right? So you've got a cluster for defense, space, and security. It's called Sensec. You've got for environmental technology a cluster called Clean. For fintech and finance, you've got a cluster called Copenhagen Fintech. For life sciences and welfare technologies, you've got Danish life science cluster, and so on and so forth, right? You've got for robotics and drone technology, you've got Odense Robotics. You've got for design, fashion, and furniture. Of course, Danish design is also one of the key things in the world that's there. So they've got clusters of their own. And these clusters are elementally at their core, they are the implementation or manifestation of this triple helix structure, where the government, which is policy-driven stakeholders, they come together along with commercial businesses and business interests and academia. And when they come together is when you have a seamless movement of ideas becoming reality, becoming something that transforms civil society.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. I think that triple helix structure that you're talking about, I think you're getting the right stakeholders at the right platform to solve, I think, problems at scale and bring in obviously innovation at scale, because all of them are required to bring in that innovation at scale. Because we always wonder that a country as small or relatively smaller than the other countries is be able to get innovation at this scale. So I always thought that there would be some fundamental difference between what they're doing and what other countries are doing. So I think these
I think the clusters, the clusters are what has spurred growth. And I think that's something that we're hoping to also replicate in India. I mean, I wouldn't say replicate, that's too strong a word. I think we should learn from that model and create our own clusters, right? I don't think we can just lift and shift. What works in Europe need not necessarily work in India. I think we need to learn what are the best practices and create our own models.
Exactly.
Which I see has begun, right? Example is how Biocon led to the development of a very informal cluster within the Bangalore, Hyderabad region, where you had a cluster formation of research and startups happening in the agriculture university out near North Bangalore. You've got a cluster of biotech companies that have been created, where startup biotech companies are working together. You've got Biocon, which is supporting them by mobilizing the government and mobilizing themselves. So I think it's interesting how these models are being moved to India. And I'm pretty sure that that's what will also foster new areas for startups to come in and deliver solutions.
True. The thing is, what also I'm looking at is if India could not replicate, I think adjust to what India requires, because India, if you see, is like Europe, right? It's a mix of multiple states forming it's like a continent by itself. So maybe how I'm looking at it is maybe each state having their own clusters and own setup, and then obviously having a kind of a blueprint that the center provides. Maybe that's how I'm
Yes.
looking at it, and each state giving them the right freedom, structures, resources that they require, because each state would have their own inherent capabilities to set up. It could be aerospace to defense to maybe
Of
life
course. Of
sciences.
course.
I
Of
think
course. And
great.
we've seen that, right? We've
Yeah,
seen that
true,
happening in the country, right? We've seen
true.
Karnataka doing it. We've
Yeah,
seen
yeah, absolutely.
Telangana doing
Yeah,
running it as well. So we know that that can come to fruition. We know that that can happen. It's just
yeah,
about the will to make it happen. But I
true.
also just wanted to point out, it's not always about getting things from the Nordics into India. There's so much that India can teach
That's
the
also
Danish
there.
community as well,
True.
right? I think what the Nordics need to learn is how do you create solutions for a scale.
Right,
When in their reality, 5 million is a large population. In our
right.
reality, 1 billion, that is a large population, right?
True,
When you
true.
create a solution that can meet the needs of 5 million people, it is very different to scale that very solution to 1 billion people. You
Absolutely.
cannot just expand the architecture. I don't think it works that way. So this whole scaling up process is something that's new, that also has to be learned within the Danish ecosystem, and also the Nordic and the EU ecosystem, because and that's where you have a lot of these innovation programs that are being run by embassies, that are being run by independent units that have come into play. They help foster and help exchange knowledge. One example, apart from what we are doing at Norden, we're also helping create that knowledge bridge between Denmark and India. But you've got organizations like the EU Inno Center, EU India Inno Center, which is trying to do the same between Europe and India. You've got the German Indian startup exchange program called GINSET,
Right.
which is also trying to do the same thing. Invest in India is one of the front runners in trying to also build a bridge. So I think um, everything that we talked about in terms of learning and exchange of knowledge on either ends, there are agencies that are trying to work in this. And I just thought I share those agencies to everybody who's listening as well, so that they
Yeah,
can gain from
thanks.
it.
Thanks, Tom. That's interesting. I think what you pointed out is, as India, we can also teach our best practices to countries like Denmark. I think if you ask me, I think natural partners, I think Denmark has a lot to offer us. We have a lot to offer them. And I think the bridges that we create, I think now the whole world is connected. So I think we need to keep building these bridges and strengthening them as we go. And
Yeah,
there should be seamless flow of knowledge, technology, and obviously keep exploring other sectors as well. That is
right.
just my view, and I think it'll get better. So I want to maybe put that question to you, Tom, and maybe the last question is, how do you look at these bridges, obviously building further, strengthening, and could we look at other sectors as well between Denmark and India specifically? Just how would the next maybe 5 years look, or maybe 10 years look like in the space?
Um, that's prediction. So predictions can always go wrong. But in my sense, what I see is that there's already foundational work that has been laid between between these countries, right? India and Denmark have signed something called the Green Strategic Partnership, which is to foster the exchange and development of solutions to help India achieve its green goals, right? That's something that's already in progress, and that as a policy vehicle will spur a lot of development within the clean tech and green tech space within India. There's going to be a lot more movement to ensure that the right kind of technologies can be sourced from across the world to meet India's goals. Right? So that's a sector that I will see will grow rapidly in India as well. The other vehicles, apart from Norden, where we will continue to work to try and ensure we can move the needle on different sectors. Other sectors, like design, is going to see a lot more impetus within India. There's a lot more collaboration that we will see happen within this space. You will see a lot more work happening within the AI robotics, drone technology sectors, because that's another area that India is also working really strongly in. The number of data sciences programs that have been launched in India to train the new generation to get into it is indicative that this is an area that India wants to become world leaders in by providing the scale of talent. You will also see a lot more action happening within the life sciences space and welfare technology, because that is something that in India, there is also an increased focus to enhance livability. Right? So we started that out with the smart cities mission, is to make our cities livable. Then you now have, how do you make yourself or humans live longer? Can we live healthier? That is an area where you will also see a lot more technology and sectoral focus coming in. But apart from that, your traditional sectors like digitalization, that again is just going to move forward, because as the world is advancing, the focus and the importance of digital technologies will only amplify. So digitalization, that will continue to be a stronghold. Fintech will continue to be a stronghold. Decentralized finance might be another area that will also come in big and start growing into becoming a large sector of collaboration as well. So I think that's what I'm looking at. And of course, not to forget the food technology, right? These are the areas that will continue to be strongholds or will develop themselves into being new strongholds.
Awesome, Tom. That's, I think, quite encouraging. So to all listeners out there, in any of this space, from food tech to clean tech to digitalization, drone, I think design also, Tom, that you mentioned, that's also an interesting field. I think design and architecture is architecture.
So architecture, if you're talking about urban planning, sustainable city development, right, all of these will come into play. And that's the smart cities very beautifully kind of moved into this of trying to bring urban infrastructure there. And what we have to remember is, between India and Denmark, our Honorable Prime Minister Modi had stated a few years back that Denmark has the skill, India has the scale. And that's very, very nicely put to understand how collaboration can be built up between the countries as well. And this is increasingly being resonated across the other European countries as well.
Awesome. I think on that note, I think skill and scale, I think, is a perfect marriage, I would say. So on that note, to all listeners out there who want to get obviously more information on the Denmark-India bridge, I think they can get in touch with Tom. Tom, your email ID, can that be shared? Great.
Of course.
Okay, great. So I'll maybe put that in the description. You can kind of reach out to Tom and get to know more about what he does, what his organization Nordic does, and we can obviously take it from there. Tom, absolute pleasure having you here, and it was a total eye-opener for me to understand what was happening, or what was happened in the past 10 years, what was happening now, and the future. I think it looks really promising and encouraging, I think, for both the countries. So thanks a lot once again. Wish you all the best, and we'll definitely stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Vishnu. Really enjoyed this and looking forward to engaging in the future again. Thanks again.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Cheers. Thanks, Tom.
Cheers.